You know, we've talked a lot about how AI is popping up in, well, all sorts of places. But today we're diving into something truly groundbreaking.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
How it's starting to make sense of the incredibly intricate world of medical images.
Ah, okay. Like microscopy stuff.
Exactly. Think about when pathologists look at tissue samples under a microscope, that's histopathology, trying to pinpoint diseases like cancer. It's a super specialized skill, takes years to master.
And it's absolutely vital for getting the diagnosis right. A huge amount of work.
Right. Now, the thing is, current text-based AI, it misses so much of the crucial visual information in these slides.
Yeah, it only sees the report, not the image itself.
And even the image-based AI that exists, sometimes it struggles to explain why it's making a certain call. It's a bit of a black box.
Which isn't ideal for clinicians, obviously. They need to understand the reasoning.
So our focus today, it's called ChatEXAONEPath. It aims to bridge this gap, creating a visually aware AI that can also have a conversation about what it sees.
Interesting. So bringing the language and vision together for pathology.
Exactly.
Yeah, and to really get a sense of what this means, you have to remember pathologists are looking for these incredibly subtle visual clues, tiny changes in the tissue structure.
Uh-huh.
It's incredibly resource intensive. And with the number of samples just going up and up,
There's a bottleneck.
there really is. There's a real need for more efficient tools.
Yeah.
And that's why this whole move towards digital pathology is so important.
Turning the glass slides into digital files.
Exactly. And that lets you apply these computational methods, these AI aids. It's critical.
Yeah, totally. And look, we've all seen how large language models, LLMs, have just exploded, right?
Yeah.
They've completely changed how we deal with text-based medical data.
Oh, absolutely. They understand language, generate text. It's pretty amazing stuff.
Okay, let's unpack this. But here's the key challenge. So much of what goes into a diagnosis isn't just in the written report.
No, it's what the doctors see, the visual evidence in the images.
That's the core puzzle, isn't it? LLMs are great with words, but how do you get them to truly understand the rich visual information locked inside a medical image?
Well, that's where these multimodal LLMs, MLLMs, come in. AI systems that can handle both images and text together.
And that brings us right to the heart of today's deep dive. We're exploring this really exciting new development, ChatEXAONEPath.
Wow.
And this isn't just any MLLM, it's been specifically built for histopathology. And crucially, for working with these huge digital scans called whole slide images, or WSIs.
Ah, WSIs. So not just little patches, but the entire slide scanned at high resolution.
Precisely. Think of it like a super high-def digital version of the entire tissue sample. And the amount of visual information in these WSIs, it's staggering. Absolutely crucial for a complete diagnosis.
Makes sense.
And that's exactly where ChatEXAONEPath is designed to step in.
Okay, so our goal here, really, is for listeners to understand what makes ChatEXAONEPath tick, what's under the hood.
Yeah. And what's its potential? Can it really help clinicians diagnose cancer by understanding these super complex images alongside the text?
How does it combine these incredibly detailed visual data sets with text to, help us understand what's happening at that microscopic level?
Good questions. And I think to really see why ChatEXAONEPath is such an interesting step, it helps to look at why previous approaches maybe didn't quite hit the mark.
Right, some of the limitations.
Yeah. Earlier deep learning models in histopathology, they often felt like those black boxes we mentioned.
Yeah, they could classify things, maybe find patterns.
But it was hard for clinicians to really grasp how they reached a conclusion. They couldn't really explain their reasoning in a human, understandable way.
Exactly. That interpretability issue was, and still is, a major hurdle for clinical adoption. They lacked that conversational reasoning part.
And while the newer LLMs have shown promise with medical text and even answering questions about small image snippets,
Dance-level images, yeah.
they've really struggled with the bigger picture, right? The broader clinical context within those massive WSIs.
That's been a real bottleneck.
Yeah.
And the big reason for that has been the training data, or lack thereof.
How so?
Well, getting large data sets that tightly link these whole slide images with detailed, specific clinical information, that's tough. Public data sets often just have the patches.
Ah, okay. So little cropped squares, maybe without the full patient story attached.
Often, yeah. Or with very limited clinical info.
Yeah.
And if you train an AI only on those pieces without the full context,
It might make wrong assumptions.
it can. It might misunderstand things or even experience what we call hallucinations, basically making stuff up because it doesn't have the complete picture from the WSI in the report.
That makes total sense. You're giving it puzzle pieces, but it can't see the box cover. So how does ChatEXAONEPath try to solve this?
So what's really significant about ChatEXAONEPath is that it's an MLLM specifically designed to understand these multimodal inputs, the WSIs, and their text reports.
Okay.
And the goal is to generate accurate responses that are grounded in that clinical context. Even when working with a relatively focused data set compared to some generic models.
And the aim is, what, to be like a pathologist's assistant?
Essentially, yeah. To offer expert-level AI assistance that could be valuable for, well, maybe general users asking basic questions, but also for experienced pathologists needing deeper insights.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. What are the core innovations here? What did the researchers actually do?
They highlight three main advancements in the paper. First, they developed this thing called RADAR.
RADAR, like an
Yeah.
acronym?
Yep. It stands for Retrieval-Based Data Generation Pipeline. It's basically a clever system they built.
Okay, what does this do?
They use it to create specific instruction tuning datasets. They took 10,094 pairs of WSIs, and they're matching histopathology reports from the Cancer Genome Atlas, TCGA.
Right, TCGA, that's a huge cancer research database. So RADAR processes these pairs to make better training data.
Exactly. It generates question-answer pairs based on the report content relevant to the image.
Okay, smart way to build a more targeted data set. What's the second key piece?
The second contribution is the fine-tuning of an existing MLLM framework called LLaVA.
LLAV.
Yeah, Large Language and Vision Assistant. They adapted LLaVA using those WSI report pairs that RADAR generated.
Okay.
And a really crucial part of this is using a specialized vision tower inside the model. It's specifically designed to handle these big WSIs.
A vision tower, like a component just for seeing.
Pretty much. It includes a patch encoder and an aggregator. Remember how we said the WSI is broken down?
Yeah, into patches, like little snapshots.
The vision tower processes those patches and figures out what's important across the whole slide.
Got it. Taking these massive images, breaking them down, analyzing the bits, and then intelligently putting the important parts back together. Makes sense. And the third contribution,
The final key element is introducing an AI-based evaluation protocol.
evaluating the AI. Using another AI.
Basically, yes. It's designed to assess how well the model, ChatEXAONEPath, understands the medical context. It compares the answers it generates to the original reports using 7 specific criteria.
7 criteria. Okay, and how did it do?
Well, the study reports that ChatEXAONEPath achieved an acceptance rate of nearly 63%, 62.9% to be exact, in diagnosing images from their test set, which had over 1,000 WSI report pairs.
Wow. Okay, nearly 2 out of 3 times this AI evaluator thought its answers were good enough based on those criteria. That's pretty significant.
It is. It shows real promise.
So let's dig a bit deeper into how it actually works under the hood. You
Right.
mentioned this vision tower. What's going on in there?
Right. So because these WSIs are just so massive, gigapixels sometimes, you can't just feed the whole thing into the AI at once. It's too much data.
Right. Need to break it down.
So the first step in the vision tower is breaking down each WSI into smaller, manageable chunks.
Patches.
We mentioned those. How small are they? In this study, they used patches that were 256 by 256 pixels, captured at a 20x zoom level. Think of it like tiling a huge photograph.
Okay, like a detailed mosaic. Got it. And then what happens to these individual tiles, these patches?
That's where the patch encoder comes in. For this, they used a pre-existing model, a foundational model for histopathology called ChatEXAONEPath.
ChatEXAONEPath! Sounds powerful.
It is. It's already been trained on millions, like 2.8 million, patches from TCGA and another project called GTX. So it's already learned the basic visual language of tissue samples.
So it knows what different cell shapes or tissue structures generally look like.
Exactly. It extracts key visual features from each patch. And importantly, the researchers kept the core knowledge of this pre-trained ChatEXAONEPath frozen.
Frozen, meaning they didn't change it during their training?
Right. They used it as is, like a powerful pre-built feature extractor for the patches.
Okay, so it's learned to spot important visual patterns in these tiny tissue snippets. Now, how do you go from looking at, thousands of these little pieces to understanding the whole slide?
That's the job of the next part, the patch aggregator. They use a specific type called CLAM clustering constrained attention, multiple instance learning. Bit of a mouthful.
CLAM.
Yeah.
Okay, what does it do? Does it just average them all?
No, it's much smarter than that. It uses attention mechanisms. Think of it like the AI learning to pay more attention to certain patches than others.
Ah, so it focuses on the important regions, like where a pathologist might look more closely?
Precisely. It identifies the most critical regions within the WSI, the ones most likely to contain diagnostic information, and gives them more weight.
Okay.
Then it combines the information from these key regions to create a single representative summary and embedding of the entire WSI.
So not just averaging everything, but intelligently weighting the bits that really matter. That sounds much more efficient.
It is. It helps filter out the noise and focus on the signal.
And I think you mentioned something earlier about genetic information being involved somehow
Right.
with the aggregator.
Yes, that's a really interesting aspect here. The CLAM-based patch aggregator, which they call CBPA in the paper, was actually pre-trained in this study to incorporate genetic data too,
What kind of genetic data?
specifically RNA sequencing data from the same samples.
Wow. So it's linking the visual patterns it sees in the patches with the underlying gene activity.
That's the idea. By connecting the visual features with molecular information, the aggregator can potentially create an even more robust and clinically relevant summary of the WSI. It adds another layer of biological context.
That's really clever, tying what it looks like to what it's doing genetically. Okay, so now we have this WSI embedding this condensed representation of the whole image informed by genetics. How does that connect with the text, the pathology report?
Right, because we need the AI to understand both. That's the job of the vision projector.
Vision projector, okay.
This module takes that WSI embedding we just talked about and
Yeah.
essentially translates it. It projects it into the same space as the text embeddings.
The same space. What does that mean exactly?
Think of it like creating a common language or coordinate system. So the representation of tumor found in the upper quadrant from the image embedding ends up being numerically close to the representation of the words tumor found in the upper quadrant from the text embedding.
Ah, so the AI can tell when the image and the text are referring to the same concept. It allows them to be compared and combined easily.
Exactly. It uses techniques like attention pooling and linear layers to achieve this alignment. They mention it's similar to an approach used in a previous model called PathChat.
Okay, making sure the image features and the text features can talk to each other. Got it. And what's the actual language brain doing the understanding and generating the answers?
The language backbone they used is Llama 2, specifically the 7B chat model.
Lamine A27B, so a 7 billion parameter model. Pretty powerful, open source, too.
Yep. And it's already been fine-tuned for dialogue. They're using it within the LAA framework we mentioned earlier.
Right. LML lets Alama handle both text and these projected image embeddings together.
Correct. By essentially combining these representations, LAVE enables Lamidae to understand the relationships between what's in the image and what's written in the report, and then generate text based on both.
All right, fascinating architecture. We've got the pieces, breaking down the image, encoding patches, aggregating smartly, projecting into text space, and then the LLM tying it all together. Now, how is this whole ChatEXAONEPath system actually taught to do its job? What's the training process like?
It happens in two main stages. Phase 1 is all about vision-language alignment.
Aligning the seeing and the reading.
Exactly. During this phase, they train the vision tower, the patch encoder and aggregator, and that vision projector using the WSI report pairs.
Okay.
The goal here is purely to make sure the visual features extracted from the images are properly linked up with the meaning of the text in the reports. Get them speaking that common language.
And what about the language model itself during this phase?
Importantly, during this first phase, LMA2, the language model, is kept frozen.
So it's not learning yet.
It's not learning how to answer questions yet. The focus is solely on training the vision components to produce representations that the frozen LLM will eventually understand.
Okay, step 1. Teach the vision parts to create good inputs for the language model. Then what happens in phase 2?
Phase 2 is the instruction tuning phase. This is where the real conversational ability comes in.
This is where it learns to answer questions.
Precisely. Now, the Lamine 2 model is unfrozen, and the whole system is fine-tuned together. It learns to generate relevant answers based on specific questions or instructions using both the image and text context.
And this is where that Radar data set comes in, right? With the generated questions and answers.
Exactly. That dataset provides the examples it learns from in this phase. And to make this fine-tuning more efficient, especially with a big model like Lamine 2,
They need some tricks.
they use a technique called LoRa low-rank adaptation. It's a popular method that allows you to fine-tune these huge models much more efficiently without having to update all of its billions of parameters. It saves a lot of computational cost.
Loro, right. Heard of that. Makes tuning feasible.
Yeah. And they also use specific system prompts. These are like instructions given to the language model at the start of a conversation to set the context.
Like telling it, you're a helpful pathology assistant.
Something like that, yeah. It helps guide the model on its expected role and the kind of responses it should generate. It helps ensure the AI learns not just to see the details, but to explain its findings in a clinically usable way.
Okay, so phase 1 links vision and language. Phase 2 teaches it to answer questions using that link, made efficient with LoRa. Makes sense. Now, let's circle back quickly to that Radar pipeline. How did it actually create those question-answer pairs for phase 2?
Right, RADAR. Retrieval augmented dataset generation. It's a pretty neat process, broken down into a few steps.
Okay.
First step, get the text out of the reports. Pathology reports are often PDFs, sometimes even scanned images of text.
Oh, right, not always clean digital text.
Exactly. So they used optical character recognition, OCR, to convert those reports into plain text that the AI can actually process.
Standard step 1 for dealing with documents. Got it. What's next?
Second step is building a vector database. They use something called ChromaDB.
A vector database? What's that for?
They chop the extracted report text into smaller chunks, and then they store these chunks in the vector database. It essentially indexes these chunks based on their meaning, their semantic content.
So you can search for concepts, not just keywords.
Precisely. When a question is generated or posed later, the system can very quickly retrieve the text chunks from the report that are most relevant to that question based on semantic similarity. It's like building a smart index for all the report information.
Okay, so extract text with OCR, index it meaningfully in a vector database. What's the final step in Radar?
The final step is actually generating the question-answer pairs. For this, they used another powerful LLM,
Which are?
LMA 3.1.70b instruct, a bigger, more recent model than the LAM-A2 used in ChatEXAONEPath itself.
Using a bigger model to generate training data for the smaller one.
Exactly. They gave this LAMA 3.1 model a specific prompt, along with those relevant text chunks retrieved from the vector database in the previous step.
Ah, giving it the context from the report.
Right. And based on that context, LMA 3.1 generates a relevant question and a high-quality answer. So it's using a powerful AI, guided by retrieved context, to create the targeted training examples needed for ChatEXAONEPath's instruction tuning phase.
That's a really interesting approach, leveraging a state-of-the-art LLM to bootstrap the training data for their specific multimodal model. Okay, so that explains the architecture and the training. How did they actually put ChatEXAONEPath to the test? What were the experiments like?
So the main dataset they used for both training and testing was derived from that TCGA pan-cancer histopathology collection.
The 10,000 plus WSI report pairs we mentioned.
Correct. From that, they created two main versions of instruction tuning datasets for comparison. The first one, they called dataset V1. For this, the answers in the question-answer pairs were generated directly by GPT-4o, a very capable model, using the full text of the pathology reports as context.
So using a top-tier general LLM to generate answers based on the complete report, how many pairs did that create?
That dataset maintained the original scale, around 10,000 pairs.
Okay. And the second data set?
The second one, dataset V2, was the one generated using their Radar pipeline, with LAMA A3.1.70b doing the generation based on retrieved chunks.
The one we just discussed, was it the same size?
No, this one was much larger. Because Radar could generate multiple relevant Q&A pairs from different chunks of the same report, dataset V2 ended up containing nearly 70,000 WSI report pairs, a seven-fold increase.
Wow, okay, so dataset V1 used GPT-4o on full reports, around 10K pairs. Dataset V2 used their Radar method with LAMA 3.1, generating nearly 70K pairs. Big difference.
Huge difference. And then they trained different versions of ChatEXAONEPath.
Right. Let me guess. ChatEXAONEPath V1 trained on dataset V1 and V2 trained on dataset V2.
Exactly. They also trained a third version, V3, which used the same Radar dataset as V2, dataset V2, but had a slight tweak in how the images were initially processed, using a different pre-trained vision model component.
Okay, so V1, V2, and V3. The crucial part then is how they evaluated them. You mentioned the AI evaluator.
Yes, that AI-based evaluation protocol. They used another instance of LAMA 3.1.70b instruct, the same big model used in Radar, but this time acting as the judge.
Okay, how did the judging work?
For each question in their test set, which had 11,134 WSI report pairs, they held back from training. They had each ChatEXAONEPath model, V1, V2, V3, generate 10 different possible answers.
10 tries for each question? Why 10?
To get a better sense of the model's typical output and avoid judging based on one potentially lucky or unlucky answer, the AI evaluator then looked at those 10 answers.
And pick the best one.
It selected the best one first. Then it made a final decision. Accept or reject that best answer based on those 7 criteria we talked about earlier.
Right. The 7 criteria judged by LAMA 3.1. That's a pretty sophisticated way to try and get an objective score. What were those criteria again, quickly?
They were looking at accuracy, relevance, completeness, clarity, appropriateness, consistency, and also the presentation of the answer.
Pretty comprehensive.
And to try and make this AI judging less of a black box itself, they used chain of thought prompting.
Meaning the evaluator AI had to explain its reasoning.
Exactly. It provided a step-by-step justification for why it accepted or rejected the answer based on those criteria, adds a layer of interpretability to the evaluation itself.
Okay, that makes sense. So what were the results? What did they find when they compared V1, V2, and V3 using this AI evaluator? Which one performed best?
The quantitative results were, well, they are quite interesting and maybe not what you'd immediately expect.
Oh, how so?
ChatEXAONEPath V1, the one trained on the smaller GPT-4o generated data -- V2. Wait, the one trained on less data did better. According to the AI evaluator, yes. V1 got an acceptance rate of 54.41%. V2, trained on the much larger rater dataset V2, only got 42.86%.
That is surprising. You'd think the 7x larger dataset generated by their own pipeline would lead to better performance?
You would intuitively think so. Interestingly, ChatEXAONEPath V3, which used the same large rater dataset as V2, but had that slightly different image processing setup, achieved the highest acceptance rate overall at 62.87%.
Okay, so V3 was the best, hitting that nearly 63% mark. But the comparison between V1 and V2 is the really head-scratching part.
It really is.
What did the researchers think happened there? Why didn't the bigger retrieval-augmented dataset V2 outperform the smaller GPT-4o generated one, V1?
Well, that's a key insight to take away here. They suggest that simply blowing up the dataset size using this kind of automated augmentation, it might not be enough.
It's not just about quantity.
It seems not. The issue might be the quality, or more specifically, the alignment between the generated text and the WSI visuals in that augmented dataset.
Alignment, meaning?
Meaning, even though the rater system retrieved relevant text chunks, the questions and answers generated by LMN 3.1 based on those chunks might not have perfectly matched the most salient visual features in the corresponding WSI.
Ah, so the generated text might be talking about something technically present in the report, but maybe not the most important thing visually, or vice versa?
Potentially, yes.
What?
Or there could be subtle misalignments. They suggest this could introduce noise or confusion for the model during training, actually hindering performance despite the larger data volume. In contrast, GPT-4o, working with the full report context for dataset V1, might have generated answers that, while fewer, were perhaps better aligned overall with the global context of the WSI.
Fascinating. So it really underscores that for these multimodal models, it's not just about having lots of text data and lots of image data. It's about how tightly and accurately they're linked. The quality of the alignment seems critical.
Absolutely critical. More data isn't always better data, especially in complex multimodal tasks.
Okay, so that's the quantitative picture, with V3 performing best, but that interesting V1 versus V2 result. What about the qualitative side, when they looked at the kinds of answers and the evaluator's reasoning?
Qualitatively, the AI evaluator often seemed quite capable. It could frequently identify when ChatEXAONEPath correctly pinpointed tumor types or locations, for example, and justify its acceptance based on the criteria.
So it showed some genuine medical understanding.
It seemed to, yes. However, they also observed some limitations with the AI evaluator itself.
Oh, like what?
For instance, sometimes it appeared overly strict about minor constraints mentioned in the prompt, like the desired length of the answer. It might reject an otherwise accurate diagnosis just because the explanation was slightly too long or too short.
Huh. So getting caught up in the superficials sometime?
A bit, yeah. They also noted some instability or inconsistencies in its reasoning process. If the evaluator decided to reject an answer early in its chain of thought, maybe based on one criterion like accuracy, its subsequent justifications for the other criteria, like completeness or clarity, sometimes seemed less thorough or well-reasoned, almost like it had already made up its mind.
Right, confirmation bias kicking in even for the AI evaluator.
Possibly. It highlights that using AI to evaluate AI, while promising for scale and objectivity, isn't a perfect solution yet. The evaluator itself can have quirks and biases.
Yeah, the fact that even the AI judge has limitations really underscores how complex it is to truly validate these systems for high-stakes use like medical diagnosis. It raises big questions about reliability.
Definitely. How do we ensure these evaluation systems are themselves trustworthy? It's a challenge.
Okay, so pulling this all together, what are the main things we should really take away from this deep dive into ChatEXAONEPath?
Well, first, the study definitely underscores the significant potential here. WSI-level MLLMs like ChatEXAONEPath could become really valuable tools for pathologists. Helping them navigate the huge amount of visual information in cancer diagnoses seems like a realistic goal.
Right. The potential is clearly there.
Second, the development of that radar pipeline is a notable contribution. Even if it didn't lead to the best results in this specific setup, the idea of using retrieval augmentation to create instruction tuning data for specialized multimodal domains is powerful and likely to be built upon.
A tool for creating better training data. Useful.
And third, the introduction of that interpretable AI-based evaluation system. Even with its current limitations, it represents progress towards more objective and scalable ways to assess these complex generative AI models, which is crucial.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing, was it? We had some unexpected findings.
Absolutely. That finding that simply making the radar dataset bigger didn't automatically lead to better performance is a really important lesson. Quality and alignment over sheer quantity, especially for multimodal AI.
A cautionary tale for data augmentation.
Yes. And the inconsistencies they saw in the AI evaluator itself, that points to the ongoing challenges in reliably measuring how good these systems really are, particularly in sensitive fields like medicine where good enough needs to be extremely reliable.
So what's next then? What are the researchers planning to do to build on this work, maybe address some of these challenges?
They specifically mentioned planning future work exploring the use of a multimodal evaluator.
Ah, an evaluator AI that can understand both the images and the text itself.
Exactly. The idea is that an evaluator that can also see the WSI might provide more robust, accurate, and interpretable assessments of ChatEXAONEPath's answers compared to the current text-only LMA 3.1 evaluator.
Yeah.
You could potentially cross-reference the generated text against the actual visual evidence.
That makes a lot of sense, using a multimodal judge for a multimodal model.
Okay. So yeah, ChatEXAONEPath represents a really fascinating step forward in getting AI to truly grapple with the visual complexities of histopathology.
It does. It feels like it brings us closer to a future where AI can genuinely assist pathologists, analyzing these incredibly detailed images, maybe improving diagnostic speed or even accuracy.
That's the hope, potentially leading to better efficiency and maybe even catching subtle things.
And that surprising result about the data augmentation is really sticking with me. It's such a stark reminder that it's not just about feeding more and more raw data into the machine.
No, it's about the right data, high-quality data, and ensuring that the different modalities, the visual and the textual, are properly connected and aligned. That seems paramount.
Precisely, which I think leads us to a final thought for our listeners to maybe chew on.
Okay.
Given this potential AI that can interpret both intricate medical images and complex text reports at potentially an expert level, what kind of impact could this really have on the future of diagnosis, on patient care?
Big questions.
Yeah. And crucially, what are the essential steps we absolutely need to take right now and going forward to make sure these powerful technologies are genuinely reliable, that they're trustworthy enough for real-world clinical use?
It's a huge responsibility.
It really is. Think about that delicate balance we saw here. The allure of just using massive data sets versus the fundamental, maybe harder work of ensuring the quality and the precise alignment of that data, especially when the stakes are, quite literally, someone's health. Where should the focus be?